Hi everybody, this is me, Linda, speaking, and we have with us our guest speaker for today, Deborah Roth, and it's really a pleasure to have her. She's been active in the medical field in this area for a long time and is the CFO of Valley Mountain Regional Center and works out of the Stockton office. And as many of you know, right across the street from MJC on Blue Gum is the Modesto office of it. There's a good reason why we've asked her to come, and that's because when you deal with small children, particularly babies, the first probably place where you might refer somebody is to Valley Mountain Regional Center, because they're the people who are the best equipped through a lot of federal funding and ideas under IDEA that have put it in place where we provide services to young children. I could ask her to talk about teenagers and adolescents who are covered by them also, but I've asked her to specifically target the youngest of the children and through toddlers. So those are the questions she's going to answer today. So I'm going to ask her the questions and you're going to get to hear her answers. And I just think she's one of the most delightful people and experts that I know, and I hope you're going to enjoy her too as much as I do.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction.
You like that?
I hope I can live up to it.
Oh, you already have. My first question of her is, what is Valley Mountain Regional Center, and who supports or subsidizes the services that they offer?
Okay, Valley Mountain Regional Center is one of 21 regional centers in the state of California. Most of them were formed in the late 60s, early 70s, pursuant to the Lanterman Developmental Services Act. And so we're covered by in California Welfare and Institutions Code, and we follow Title 17. So who supports and subsidizes our services? Well, we're supported directly by the State of California Department of Developmental Services. All 21 regional centers have one contract, and it's with the state. But they get about 60% of the funds that flow through them to us. So 100% through the state, but 60% federal, 40% comes mostly from the general fund.
Who do you serve? Who are the clientele that can use the services of Valley Mountain?
Valley Mountain Regional Service Center services about 11,000 clients that we refer to as consumers in Stanislaus, San Joaquin, Calaveras, Tuolumne, and Amador County. We serve anyone with a developmental disability from day of birth, if it's diagnosed, and it often can be diagnosed at birth, through death, and that can be in the 90s. The oldest one case I've ever worked with was somebody who was in his late 80s.
That's a big population to serve.
It is.
So if we're going to talk about children, let's start with three groups, and I put them into three different areas, but you can lump them together if you want to. Infants, toddlers, and children to age 18. So particularly I'm interested here in infants and toddlers. So maybe you could address how they get to you and what services they get.
Okay, to us, the age doesn't really make a difference. In the late 60s, how the system was developed was because a group of mothers went to Frank Lanterman, and they had children, and back in the day, they were all referred essentially to institutions and told to institutionalize their children. And they felt that if they had appropriate supports in their communities, they wouldn't have to do that, and it would be better for the community and better for the consumers. So whereas 0 to 3 we would look at as early start, our services go way beyond early start. We don't distinguish between the children in their age other than the source of our funding. But we get about $1.3 million in early start funding, but we spend closer to $18 million in a year on the children who are between 0 and 3. But we are the fill-in service. So depending on the age of the child, the generic resource, any other resource has to be exhausted first. So if the child is a little older, and it's something that the school would be required to provide as an educational service under IDEA, then we wouldn't pay for that. The school is considered the generic resource. Then if the child needed something else that wasn't educational in nature, but related to their developmental disability, that's when we would step in. And that's why the collaboration between the agencies is so important. It's not about what a regional center won't pay for, it's what we can pay for. And if the child needs it, then we'll pay for what they need. Does that answer that?
And that goes up through before they get into kindergarten.
Yes.
You would pay for all of those services if they were mandated as necessary.
Right, as long as no one could say that they were required as an educational service.
Okay,
So there's
so it's
not
not school related.
Right.
If the cost is not covered through the schools, and the cost is there for that parent up until age 4 or age 3, does the parent have to assume any of that expense? So who would pay for those services? Is the parent ever responsible for those?
We would pay for those services that the child needed through a development. If it's related to a developmental disability in California, the regional center will pay for the most part, irrespective of the family's ability to pay. There are now, in the last few years since the economy's been so bad, there have been some new rules that have come into place. There's an annual family program fee if you're at 400% above the poverty level for certain families. The only major fee would be the parental fee, and that would be if your child under the age of 18 were to go into placement. The state's philosophy is if you had that child living in your home, you would have to pay for the placement. But out of our 11,000 consumers, we only have a couple of dozen of children in placement. So for the most part, regional center services are free of charge.
Well, who are the providers? Once you have them, who provides the actual services to the children?
It depends. Everything is driven by the individual plan. The individual program plan, the individual family plan, the individual educational plan. Everything is driven by the plan. So under Title 17, we call them vendors. I like providers, it's a better word because I'm from the healthcare industry. But in California, they're referred to as vendors. And vendors go through a process that says basically, here are the rules, and I understand the rules. But the vendors can be anything that the consumer would need. It could be a healthcare provider. It could be a dentist. The biggest category of expenditure for us is board and care facilities. Out of the $120 million that we spend in our regional center, $30 million a year go for board and care facilities. And those are typically 6-bed or smaller homes integrated into the community, the whole goal being non-institutional. So many of our care providers are licensed by the community care licensing. Then the second big thing is day program vendors. Many of our consumers engage in activities during the day. Some of those are to train them to work, others are to train them to be self-sufficient. But then, let's say, if we're talking about a child, we have many what we call comprehensive services is the word we use. So there are a variety of those providers in our communities, developed in our communities, who, in working particularly with children who have autism, let's say we could have an early interventional behavioral training program. That's a real good example of how we collaborate in our service area with the schools. We pay half, they pay half. We work directly with the SELPAs to come up with those fees and to split the fees. And that makes our regional center different from other regional centers. The relationships between some regional centers and their school districts are not as collaborative and not as team-oriented. So we process the claims, we pay the services, but we have a broad spectrum of providers, and that's driven by the individual needs of the consumer.
So those could be doctors, they could be social service people, licensed clinical social workers. They could be special teachers, special programs like the autism programs, those
Right.
sorts of things.
That would be what we would call the comprehensive programs.
Okay, and so how young would a child be to, let's say, be supported through the autism spectrum by being placed in services? Any idea?
Just as soon as the parents notice or feel like something's not right, what we would tell them first is talk to your pediatrician, talk to your healthcare provider. Your child may be developing normally, and you may just not know that your child is developing normally. Your child may not be behind, but that would be the first line. But you don't even have to go to your pediatrician. You can, as a parent, or you can go directly to the regional center, and it's a matter of picking up the phone and say, starting off with an initial questionnaire. We'll run you through a series of questions, and then the intake process begins. And if the child is under 3, we're going to try and get them through in 45 days.
Wow.
And so what will happen is, based on, then the second step is an intake coordinator would contact you, and then they would have a variety of assessments depending on what behaviors your child is exhibiting. But let's say you called the regional center and you said, I don't think my child is hearing well. Well, hard of hearing or deafness isn't something that would qualify you for regional center services. So we would probably ask you to talk to your doctor or talk to the schools first before you came to us. But as soon as one of those individuals felt like, oh no, that's just one thing, but we see these other things that we believe are truly developmental delays, then you would be referred to us, and we would start the evaluation process to determine whether or not you qualify for services. The services, to qualify, it's very specific. You have to have a diagnosis of epilepsy, or you have to have an diagnosed intellectual disability, or cerebral palsy, or autism. And autism is one of the more difficult ones, because I think you all know there's not a genetic test for it, there's not a blood test for it. So that's where regional centers have seen tremendous growth in recent years, because not only is the incidence increasing, but the awareness has been increasing.
What would you say is the real mission, or mission statement, mission purpose of VMRC?
Our mission is to help every single one of our consumers reach their highest potential. And that's why that individual program plan or education plan or family plan is so important, because when you talk about collaboration, it's really a point where everybody who cares about a consumer comes together. And it can include a teacher, it can include a cousin, it's anyone who has the consumer's best interest at heart, and you come together and talk about what that consumer wants to do. And to the extent possible, we really want to honor the consumer's wishes. It's not about people making decisions about the consumer just with them sitting in the room. If the consumer, we want them to reach their highest potential, and if there are decisions that they want to make, that they're capable of making, that's what our goal is.
Wow.
It's really a mission-driven organization. Linda mentioned that I came from healthcare. I've been in the non-profit industry for since 1983. But this organization, when I go to the board meeting, it truly is about helping people with developmental disabilities reach their goals. And members of our board are parents. I mean, I've seen grown men literally cry about the difference that our services have made in their children's lives. Just saying, my son wouldn't make eye contact and he said, "I love you." I mean, he just broke down and cried. And we have some real success stories. Not every story is a success story. but we have a lot of good ones.
You know, you've actually answered all of my questions. I guess the last one I had was specific outcomes, and I think you dealt with that and what works the best in achieving those outcomes. So maybe you might want to just address that a little bit.
Well, that's actually one of the most difficult areas. With an adult consumer who, let's say, has cerebral palsy, you can talk to that individual and you can find out what they really want to accomplish in the next year. We have one of our board members who has that disability. He is difficult to understand when he speaks, but when he does, I always listen because he is whip smart, and he is telling us how it feels to have his disability, and he can articulate it better than some. And so we know when we're achieving the goals for that particular consumer. It's more difficult with the autistic families and the early interventional behavioral training, by way of example, because it really is early interventional behavioral training, and it works for some people and it doesn't work for other people, and you feel really saddened for the parents because they see their child next to another child and it's working for that other child and it's not working for them. And our clinical staff has criteria wherein we track and measure over time how the disability is presenting itself and whether or not the training is working. And some families really struggle because they think, well, I just want it, till they're 15, till they're 16, till they're 18. It's not working. We have to look at other things to help your child and we develop. And not everything can be fixed, and that's the real struggle. Is taking every case as an individual. No two cases are alike. And deciding what's best and we also have to consider what's the most cost-effective methodology. If a therapy is working and it's expensive, we will pay for it. But if it's not working and all of the best practices and all of the information we have from some really fantastic educational institutions like the Mind Institute at UC Davis tell us it's not going to work based on the criteria, then we have to go on to another plan. So I hope it's very difficult. It's very difficult. We just have to try and help the person be the best that they can be.
Do you take any volunteers? This isn't on your list, but do you have any volunteers that are accepted by VMRC to work?
We actually do not have a lot of volunteers. The reason is because you really need people with developmental disabilities experience to work with our population. However, we do have first of all, our board. We're always looking for volunteers for our board. That's a commitment, typically 3 years long, one board meeting a month, plus we like you to be on one of our committees as well. The real work gets done in committees. That's where you delve into the details. We have finance and personnel. We have consumer services. We have a whole variety of board opportunities. We like to cover our entire service area, and you can see what openings we have on our board at www.vmrc.net. We also have a foster grandparent senior companion program. Those are older individuals who volunteer to accompany our consumers while they're in the schools, most of them in the high schools, just to help them navigate the system, just to provide that little extra bit of assistance. And that's a program we run about 60 volunteers a year. And it's also the seniors are low income, so it's a win-win. And that's a fabulous program. So information about that is also available on our website.
Thank you so
You're
very
welcome.
much. And if any of you have questions, email them to me and I will ask Debbie and I'll get back to you with those answers. So if you want to, just click on the center. There you go.